Okay, good morning, everyone. I assume it's morning for most people. For me, it is actually afternoon, 5 p.m. I'm currently in the UK. Hunkering down during this coronavirus in a nice little lodge on a golf course, which is not too bad, but nobody's allowed to play golf, and so it's all about staying inside at the moment. Anyway, hope everybody is doing fine and finding something to do during lockdown if you currently have lockdown where you are. So this webinar is called EdgeRater for HGSI users. The idea is that there are quite a few people who have both HGSI, which is high growth stock investor, for those who don't know, I think most people do, and EdgeRater together. And when you put these two programs together, they're both desktop programs that sit on your computer hard drive and are very powerful in their own rights, but you can link them together and do some very cool, interesting things. And so I'm going to go through how to get that connection set up in the best possible way. When you install a new computer, or you get a new computer and you put HGSI on your computer, you put EdgeRater on your computer, you'll have to go through these steps again, but the initial steps are one-time setup steps. So we're going to go through that just to make sure everybody is on the same page. I'll go into that in a sec. So the one-time setup steps, I'll just briefly say what they are, and then I'll show you how they work. But in HGSI, there's a couple of things you need to do, or three things. The first of all is set the save location for your symbol lists to the EdgeRater symbol lists folder. And I'll just explain what this does, and then I'll show you how to do it. But in HGSI, you have your list of symbols, which essentially is in your designer or in your warehouse view. And any of those lists can be used within EdgeRater. All you have to do is export the list as an ASCII file, and you export the symbol and then maybe the name of the company. There's some options in HGSI to allow you to do that, and I'll show you. Once you've saved it in a specific folder, which is the EdgeRater symbol lists folder, it will be picked up. That text file will be picked up by EdgeRater and will appear and be usable within EdgeRater. And all you have to do then is just populate the list with data, which you do by pressing the Update Data button. So we'll talk about how to set the save location for symbol lists. You do that one time in HGSI, and then it's there from then on. And then all you have to do is just, whenever you have a new list that you want to use within EdgeRater, you just go and hit the save as ASCII, and it will pick the right location for you. The second thing is there is an add-on for EdgeRater. It's called the EdgeRater HGSI add-on. It's an add-on for HGSI, sorry, and it's something I put together. It doesn't have a lot in it, but the thing that's really useful is there is a view, a warehouse view, which contains a lot of the fields of the warehouse, which you can then, what you'll end up doing is you'll save the warehouse as an HTML file, also in another very specific location, which we'll talk about in a minute. And once you've saved that, you can do that daily, or you can do it just whenever you want to generate your own indexes in EdgeRater and do some cool things like view seasonality of industry group indexes. Once you've saved it, EdgeRater is able then to do a whole bunch of things with it, because that warehouse view contains all of the fields. So it contains things like, so it can, first of all, contains all the stocks. So there's something like 8,000 rows in that view. It's an HTML file, which is not at all useful for anybody to view themselves, but EdgeRater is able to pick up that HTML file and convert it into an Excel file, which you could then look at if you wanted, but then also can manipulate that Excel file to understand what stocks are within each industry group. And it can do some very cool things, which we'll get into, and I'll show you in a sec too. And then the third thing is, I've just really gone through that, but the purpose of doing step 2, install the add-on, is so that you can then save the HTML of the warehouse. So we'll talk about that. And then in EdgeRater, the steps are you need to set your default data provider to be HGSI. You don't 100% need to do this, but it's useful for some very specific templates that have symbols in them that are HGSI specific symbols. And you need to have the default data provider set to HGSI in order for EdgeRater to pick up those symbols. And then the next step is set your index generation template input to the warehouse HTML folder, the thing I talked about before. So I'll show you exactly how to do that. And it might not make a lot of sense to you right now, but when we go through it, it will become much clearer. So the agenda today is I'll talk about how to generate the industry group indexes in EdgeRater. I will talk about how to and show how to use those industry group indexes in any of the templates that have a symbol list as an input. You can use industry group indexes in those templates. So you can do cool things like look at linear regression of industry groups. You can look at the good, bad, ugly reports. You can look at squeezes of industry groups if that was interesting. But seasonality, I think, is one of the cool things that is actually very useful for this area. So we'll look at seasonality, obviously. Then how to drill down from an industry group to individual stocks. We'll look at that. %B bucket migration, that is the new template for looking at the bucket report. I know a lot of the old template is the bucket report template, but %B bucket migration is the new one that I would encourage people to use. It contains a lot more information and it can be produced a lot more efficiently too. It will be faster to produce. And it's got some really cool hookups to the chart, which I'll show. And then the US market summary template, so you can get an idea of how there's 10 major markets that it looks at. And you get color coding to see which markets are green, yellow, and red. And then you can see things like if there's been a kahuna in all the markets. These are conditions that can really give you a heads up to something changing. And then we'll look at the Hindenburg-Omen template and see how that performed. If that gave a heads up, here's a clue, it did, to the current market crash, the coronavirus crash, and how when it gave this the signal. So quite a lot to get through, and so I'll stop giving this little intro now. Let's get into it. There is a location that I often tell people about, and it still exists, and it's a web location which will allow you to download some files. And the file that will be useful for you to download is the add-on file, which I mentioned earlier. So just make a note of that. You can review this video and you'll find out where the shared folder is. I will show you how to do that download as we get on here. So hopefully you can see my screen. It is currently just showing HGSI. If you're not familiar, so I know there's some people here who don't know anything about HGSI, so I'll try and explain very briefly what HGSI is as we go. And there may be some people on here who are HGSI users who don't know what EdgeRater is. So there's a combination of people, so please forgive me if I get into some very basic things that you already know. But I'm just trying to get a good grounding for everybody. Once you've gone through this webinar, you will be able to use these two products together very seamlessly, and you'll have an incredible amount of power at your fingertips with all of the information that you will be able to get. So let's get into it. The first thing is I mentioned there is a add-on file. It's called the EdgeRater HGSI add-on. It's a zip file, and you can find that zip file in the shared folder location. So let's go to the shared folder location. I'll bring up a browser and I'll just type in, and this may be a little small for you to see right now on your screen, but I'll tell you what I'm typing. I'm typing in edgerater.com/shared folder. And that's going to take me to the cloud location where you can download various files, but the file we're interested in is in the integrations folder here. And inside integrations, there's HGSI folder, and in there's the EdgeRater HGSI add-ons.zip file. And you just need to download that. Depends what browser you're using. I won't get into how to download it. It will vary. depending on your browser, but I'm sure people are familiar with downloading things from the internet. Once you've downloaded it, it probably will end up in your downloads folder. That's where it did for me, and it became the EdgeRater HGSI add-on.zip. And then in HGSI, you go into your preferences and you say install add-ons and navigate to your downloads folder and then click on it, install it. HGSI will restart. It will say it's going to overwrite any that were already there, import completed. And now what that's given you is, if we look at the warehouse and we look in the views of the warehouse, there is now EdgeRater views. And the view that I'm really going to get into today is the archive view. And what that is essentially a list of all of the columns, all of the fields that are in the warehouse. So it's quite big and not very useful for, if you're just using HGSI to browse through these things. So it's just huge, lots and lots of columns, lots and lots of information. But that's what EdgeRater likes. It likes to have information. It doesn't require you to look through everything. It will process it and do the right thing with this information. And so you've got all of the fields of the warehouse. This is updated daily whenever you do your HGSI updates at the end of the day. And it's got, if we scroll down to the bottom, all of the symbols as well. So 8,822 symbols. Okay, so lots and lots of information in here. And that is something that EdgeRater can use. And the way that EdgeRater uses it is by you saving this as an HTML file. So what you would do is, and I think the best thing is for me to just tell you, you have to create a couple of folders. Remember, this is a one-time only setup step. You do this once and it's done. But here's the way I have my machine set up, and I would recommend that you follow along with this. Excuse me. So in your documents folder, you'll find the EdgeRater folder. After you've installed EdgeRater, it will have created this folder. And you'll see in there are the regular EdgeRater folders, templates, chart scripts, configuration, etc. I have manually created a folder called HGSI. And under there, I manually created two other folders, one called Warehouse Archive and one called Warehouse Export. So that's all you have to do in Windows on your file system, create that structure there. And so once you've done that, then you come into HGSI and you say File, Save as HTML. You're in, okay, so you have to be in your warehouse, selected the archive view, so you've got all of the fields here, and then you're saving it as HTML. Now, the first time that you do the save, it's going to pop you into some HGSI folder somewhere, but after you've set this one time, it will always just save you in the location that we just talked about, which is in the Documents folder, EdgeRater, HGSI, and I would like you to save it in the Warehouse Export folder as allsecurities.htm. And what will happen is, if you already have one in there, which you will if you've been running this frequently, it will just overwrite the one that's already there, and that's absolutely fine. So next time you come into HGSI, that file location will just pop up automatically. You'll basically come in here maybe in a week's time or sooner, save as HTML, and the location's already popping up in the dialog box. You don't have to set that up again. Okay, so now you have an all securities HTML, and that really is that's the step for the warehouse that you have to do in HGSI. I did also say that we need to set the export location for symbol lists, and we would do that in the designer. That's where I like to do it. You could do it from the warehouse as well, but I always have done this from the designer. And so again, this is a one-time setup step just to set the file location. And what you can do as a test is, say you want to export the, say, the Amex Gold Bugs Index. So you find that in your reference list in your group database, Amex Gold Bugs Index. You do File, ASCII Utilities, Export Groups as Lists. And then you navigate, again, you have to find your EdgeRater downloads location. This is already set up on here because I've done this once before. And navigate to your symbol list. So you find EdgeRater and then symbol lists. And you just save that file as the default name that it's given in HGSI, Amex Gold Bugs index.txt in this case. I'm going to hit save. And this is an important setting as well. Do not include subgroups. You might not have any, and there are none in this case, but I always turn that off. And exclude HGSI indexes. And make sure your format is symbol, comma, name. There are 3 choices for format, but symbol, comma, name is the one to use. And once you have this set up, it's done. You never have to do this again until you install on another computer. And it's going to overwrite my text file because I already did this earlier. So export complete. And that's really the only setting you need to do in the only settings you need to do in HGSI. From now on, we are going to be working in EdgeRater. So we've got our data location set up. And for those who aren't familiar with HGSI, it does install a full database on your hard drive. And that database contains a history of stock prices, end of day stock prices for all 8,800 securities with history going back many, many years, you know, as long as far as they, I'm not actually sure, but they go back quite a long way, you know, many decades. And it also has, so that's essentially the price information with open, high, low, close, volume, but it also has all of these warehouse fields, which can contain fundamental information, as well as some technical information too. But fundamentals, you know, such as so earnings dates and earnings reports and all kinds of fundamental fields, which you could look at in the view that I showed you, the warehouse view, and you can see all of the fields that are there. But it's a huge database installed on your hard drive, and EdgeRater is able to take advantage of that database because EdgeRater is also a desktop program installed on your computer, and it can easily get information from that database, providing we've done the setup steps that I just did. Where do you get HGSI? So that's a question, Thomas. We get HGSI from, that's a good question. And let me just bring that up. So if you bring up your browser and we'll go to highgrowthstock.com. So that's the website, highgrowthstock.com. And once you're there, you can do a free 30-day trial. Once you've signed up for the trial, you have to enter some information, and then you'll be given a temporary logon for 30 days, and you'll be able to get full use of the software for 30 days. So I would recommend checking that out, highgrowthstock.com. Okay, and I am recording this, Ralph, for future viewing. And I know I'm going a little fast, and I am aware of that. And I do know that when the recording comes out, you'll be able to pause it and complete the steps and then play it again and move on to the next step. So yeah, sorry that I'm going through this fast, but we wouldn't get through it in an hour. So I have to move on a little bit if I wasn't doing that. Okay, so we've done that. Now let's open up EdgeRater and we'll look at the steps in EdgeRater. I said the first thing you should do is set your data provider. So if you go to the Home tab, Data Provider, and EdgeRater can fetch data from a number of different places. By default, it's set to the EdgeRater data provider. For most people, that is the right thing. If you have HGSI, then I would check the box next to HGSI to make that your default data provider. It doesn't mean, if you make that default, it doesn't mean you're never going to get data from the EdgeRater data provider. It just means when there are symbols in some templates that are not associated with any list, and therefore EdgeRater doesn't know where the symbol comes from, it looks to the default location to get that data. And that's something you'll find in the US market summary template, which we'll take a look at. Those symbols are specific to HGSI, and so it's good to have that set if you're using those templates. But having said that, you can still, you will still use EdgeRater data for the symbol lists that are associated with EdgeRater. Okay. All right, so having done that, setting the default data provider, the next, and let me expand this a bit. The next thing that we should do is just take a look in the list of templates in EdgeRater. On the right-hand side, you've got various categories. The category that's primarily of interest for HGSI users is the HGSI category. And in here, you'll see a bunch of templates that I produced in conjunction with Ian Woodward and Ron Brown and Bob Meager as well. And so these templates was something that we produced several years ago and are still very useful today. And many people use these every day. I use a lot of these templates weekly. I might not look at everything every day, but definitely once a week I'll go through a handful of these. So the thing that I don't think a lot of people use at the moment, but this is the key and very important to give you some really great information, is this generate indexes from warehouse template. I have put a little star or highlighted the star beside the templates that I'm going to look at today so that they all appear in my favorites category. So generate indexes from warehouse, what does this do? This, you basically, this is the template that will look at that exported HGSI warehouse file, look at all the fields, look at all of the stocks and find out what industry group the various stocks belong to. And it will go ahead and generate its own, essentially its own industry group indexes. And they will become lists within EdgeRater that you can then run on any template in EdgeRater. So this is a one-time step too. There's the location of the warehouse file. This actually never changes once you have it set. But the very first time you come in here, you go to change settings and you basically pick out the file location where you exported the warehouse HTML file. And if you remember, that was in your documents, EdgeRater, HGSI, and then warehouse export folder. There's a file in there, allsecurities.htm. You know, and once a day or once a week or however frequently you do it, you will update your all securities HTML file, HTML file from within HGSI. And you never have to change this one again because it's always set to that specific file. Okay, so once I've clicked OK, that's done and set in there. And then all you have to do for this template is just hit run. I'm not going to do it because this template is quite a process-intensive template and will take approximately 2 to 3 minutes to finish running. Once it's finished running, if you look in your list of symbol lists, if you look in your symbol lists drop down, you will find 5 extra lists. There's the warehouse all securities list, which will be populated and up to date. This template goes ahead and makes sure that everything in here is up to date. You will have a warehouse indexes industry, and this is essentially the industry groups from HGSI. There's 175 of them. You'll notice that the to date in here is 4/17. That was Friday. So I have my HGSI database is up to date, and this is getting that information from that database. Also, it's created a couple of other ones. There's a major industry group. It is what it sounds like it is. It's the major industries. And it's created indexes of those. It's also created indexes of the sectors. And it's also created indexes by SIC code group. And that's something else, that stocks are categorized in that way within HGSI. And EdgeRater will create indexes of those groups too. So there, you just run this template one time, and it will create those 5 symbol lists for you. And once you have those symbol lists, you can run those lists on most templates, or any template in EdgeRater that takes the symbol list as input. One of the templates that takes the symbol list as input is the Seasonality Template. So I have the Seasonality Template. You'll find the Seasonality Template, by the way, in Seasonal Analysis. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. The one I'm running at the moment is called Seasonality Now, and it's basically taking this particular point in time, i.e. April the 17th, which was the last trading day, and it's looking back 10 years, and it's asking the question, what happened to all of those industry groups from April the 17th going forward for 2 weeks is the first time period, a month will be the second time period, 2 months, 3 months, and 4 months, to give you an idea of any seasonal patterns that might be within the industry groups. So let me run this, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So I just have to make sure I have warehouse indexes industry selected. I've got my Seasonality Now selected, and I'm just going to run this. If I had seasonality by month selected, then instead of looking at this particular point in time, it would look at each month individually. So January, February, March, and it would just give you an idea of what industry groups tend to perform in each of the months. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just look at what normally works right now. Okay, you'll notice in this report that there's a symbol column and a description column. When EdgeRater has generated the indexes, there wasn't a difference between the symbol and the description. It didn't magically come up with or try and figure out a symbol for each industry group. And so the symbol and descriptions are the same. So you can basically ignore one and just focus on the other one. That's why it looks a little jumbled here, because it's very compressed. I didn't want it to take up space on the screen. But the description is the industry group. Normally, this template is sorted such that the items that come to the top of the list are the items that have, over the next 2 weeks, have performed best over the last 10 years, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, please ask. I am monitoring the chat, by the way, so any questions I'll try and get to as we go. So let me zoom in on this a little bit, make it clearer. If you're familiar with EdgeRater seasonality, this will be common knowledge to you. But if you have never seen EdgeRater before, then I'll explain what you're looking at. It's a report organized by each row represents a different industry group in this case. If you ran this template on a list of symbols, then each row would represent a different stock. But here we're running it on industry group. Okay, so, and then there are sets of columns here, groups of columns. So 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, etc. It's basically telling you how many of the last 10 years were up years over the next 2 weeks. In this case, in the 2 week column, how many were down years, and what was the average gain or loss. Okay, so over the next 2 weeks, power generation, for the last 10 years, it hasn't had a losing year for April the 17th, pushing out 2 weeks or 10 trading days from April 17th. Hasn't had a losing period, and the average up has been 2%. Now, in the report viewer in EdgeRater, you'll see there is a chart comes up on the right-hand side. When you're looking at indexes, the chart, you're not going to get candlesticks with open, high, low, close, because the industry values are basically, it's just close price. And so what I do when I'm looking at industry groups is change my chart to be a line chart. And that just makes it a little clearer. Otherwise, it just becomes a dot on the screen, and it's harder to see. And the templates, the chart that I'm looking at, I just created a chart in EdgeRater. I have my own layouts in some cases. And this one just has a couple of moving averages, 50 period and a 200 period moving average. And it does have volume in the bottom, but for these indexes, volume is not applicable. There's no volume for these indexes. So I could actually get rid of that or just scrunch it down. And when I have my annotations turned on, the observing highlight is just going to point to the day for which I ran the template. Now in EdgeRater, you don't have to run a template for the very last day, like Friday. I could have run this template for, a month ago, or choose a day. I could have run this, gone back and found out where was the top of the market. Let me run the template for that date if that was of interest to you, or where was the bottom. Let's run it there and see see what it was forecasting. You could choose to run it on any particular day you like, but this has been run for Friday. And so let's just go down and look through. And the next 2 weeks is a very short period of time. You may be more interested in any of these other columns. And in general, the way that EdgeRater works is that if you single click on a column header, it's going to sort by that header. First time you click, it will sort one direction. Second time you click, it's going to sort the other direction. And then the little drop down arrows, this is very common in many EdgeRater reports, allow you to do filtering of the information. So instead of seeing all of these industry groups, even though with industry groups there aren't that many, there's only 170, it still fills the screen. And you might just want to filter out that noise, anything that didn't have, for instance, let's look at the 1 month column. If it didn't have at least 7 up years in the last 10, then you might say you're not interested in that. So you could click on the filter and just say, you can filter in different ways, but one thing you can do is you can just click on 1 through 7, that would work. Or you can say it has to be greater than, and say has to be greater than 7. Now I've got a filter set, and sorry, there aren't any greater than 7. It has to be greater than 6. So let me just do that again. Greater than 6. Okay, and now we've just got the industry groups that had at least 7 up years over the last 10. So it's allowed me to filter them. And then I can also do sorting, and I can say, well, I want to see the ones that had the best average. And so insurance services, what is this one here? This is insurance services and other insurance. Insurance services and other, basically, is what that is. Insurance services and other. And that's over the next 1 month, from April 17th, going back 10 years, had 7 of these years were up years, average of 3%. Might be interesting. Managed care as another one. And then you get down to these ones here, 1% gain over 1 month. That's really not a lot. And then, 0%, just rough, just rare, hardly up any. So that's something you can take a look at. You can also do, let's clear the filter, and you could do it in reverse. You say which of these industry groups perform the worst. And it seems like advertising and marketing has performed the worst over the last 10 years, with a 3% average and 9 down years and only 1 up year. So advertising and marketing, interesting, down here. So you might then, obviously, if you're looking at this information, you would like to drill down into the individual stocks that make up that industry group. And that's where another little piece of magic comes in EdgeRater. Remember that we saved the warehouse export in here. We created two folders, right? There was an HGS under Documents EdgeRater that we created an HGSI folder, and under that a warehouse export folder, so we could store our HTML file. And then when EdgeRater ran, when you ran that template, generate indexes from warehouse, EdgeRater created a XLSX file, or an Excel file containing all of that information in Excel format. And EdgeRater is able to open those files and do some very cool things with it. So what I'll do is I'll just, in my reports, I'll just click on open. It'll bring up my open dialog box. And I'm already navigated to the right location, but if you weren't, you'd probably end up somewhere like this in EdgeRater. You'd click on HGSI, you'd click on Warehouse Archive, and then you'd select the latest one that's been produced. Remember, each day that you run this, EdgeRater is going to go ahead and create a brand new one of these Excel files. So you will end up with a history that you can save. You know, it's on your hard drive, so you can choose to save it somewhere else. It's basically a history of the entire HGSI database. So, you know, if you ever wanted to go back and find out what stocks had, you know, what AD letter rank or any of the other fields on a particular day, you can go back in and open them up in Excel and find those fields. But not doing that here. I'm just opening it up in EdgeRater reports. And one of the things you can do is tear this off. I'm dragging it with my mouse, and I like to put it down underneath here. And you don't have to do anything special. EdgeRater knows that the list you're using has these symbols in it, and it's going to now filter your warehouse or securities down to the right industry group. So as I've clicked on advertising and marketing, which we know has bad seasonality coming up for the next month, I then look down in the warehouse or securities list, and I have my individual symbols that are in the advertising and marketing industry group. And once I'm down in here, I can actually click on these as well. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that the individual stock comes up. It's still showing the line chart, but once you're in individual stocks, you could actually change this to be a regular chart. And I do have a candlestick chart with the same information over here. So I could start just looking at candles here. Essentially I've found something in the industry group that might be interesting, and I'm then able to go and scroll through quickly through the individual stocks that make up that industry group and have a look on my chart. And if the observing tag is getting in the way and you would like to get rid of it, you can turn that off. It's really only there as a prompt, because EdgeRater reports can show you any historical date. They can be run for any historical date. It's interesting to have it point at the bar that the report was run for. But if you're just running it for the very last day, you can turn it off and avoid that if that is annoying to view. Anyway, so that's a very cool way to use industry groups. You can bear in mind you can run any template that takes a symbol list as an input, and you can run industry groups on any of those templates. Seasonality was just one that I chose because I think it is a very useful thing. But you could run it on any. There's plenty in here. The good, bad, ugly is another one that takes a symbol list as an input. Let's just try that. Okay, so the good, bad, ugly report. I'm going to move this up to this area up here and explode this a bit. Okay, and this is good, bad, ugly run on industry groups. This is a very quick way of seeing what industry groups performed well today, what's performed well best week to date, month to date, year to date. What about prior days, the last 1 day, the last 2 days, the last 3 days, 4 days, etc., prior weeks and prior months. So it's a very quick way of getting a feel for what industry groups in this case are performing. So what's the best industry group year to date? Anyone know off the top of their head? Would anyone like to have a guess? Okay, you can probably see the answer right here. The answer is, believe it or not, year to date, there is an industry group that has positive gains. Courier services, would you believe it? Courier services, what does that include? Let's have a look. Look at the line chart here. Courier services, this is how it's performed. So it did experience a sell-off, as most things did during the crash, but it has come back pretty strong, and it's now better than it was at the beginning of the year. So year to date, courier services is doing okay. And the stocks that are part of courier services are AIRT, FedEx, Stamps.com, United Parcel Services, and ZTO Express. We could look at the individual stocks in there too, if we were so inclined. Okay, Stamps, FedEx, FedEx was there, Stamps here, UPS, and ZTO. So there are some stocks that have done well year to date, or some industry groups. What about industry groups that have done poorly year to date? What's the worst performing? Cruise lines. Who would have guessed cruise lines have performed worst years to date? That's probably an easy guess. Okay, so cruise lines. What's in the cruise line group? I've got it selected here. It's 74% down on the year, the start of the year. Carnival ADR, Lindblad, Norwegian Cruise Lines, and Royal Caribbean are part of that group. So year to date, not very good. But in the Good, Bad, Ugly report, you can just scroll through and see, what about prior years? How did it do prior years? Okay, well, last year, Cruise Line Group had a 24% gain, 16% loss the year before, 30% gain the year before that, 17% loss, 22%, etc. So very quickly, this report will show you what's going on. In this case with industry groups, but you can run this on individual stocks too, and it can show you it on stocks. So that's a good one to run on industry groups. US market summary, let's get into that. US market summary template, you'll find that in your HGSI HGSI category. And sorry, there's a couple of questions. Let me just get to those. So Thomas, is the average only over the 7 years or the 10-year period? The average was over the 10-year period. Okay, so if there were up years and down years, the average will include both of those. Are the seasonal specific for today? So Ralph, are the seasonal specific today, or are they static? And can we, for the best seasonal stocks this month? Yes, so the seasonal is specific for today with that template. Looking in the seasonal analysis category, seasonality now is specific for today. Go to seasonality by month, and that will show you the seasonality for each of the months of the year. Seasonality 2 months will actually show you seasonality per 2 months. So for instance, January, February, March, April, etc. And then 3 months will it just extends on from there. So you can look at different fixed time periods. Ross, I know you're showing HGSI data procedures, but all of this can be done in EdgeRater data as well. Correct? Question mark. Yes and no. So industry groups, you're not going to get that information is not part of EdgeRater. Okay, the industry groupings come from HGSI, and they were saved out in the warehouse file that we saved. And EdgeRater reads that warehouse file and produces its own indexes based on that grouping. So you really need to have HGSI for that. And the other thing that you will not be able to do with EdgeRater without HGSI is the US market summary, because it uses specific symbols that are in HGSI. You can create your own version of that using ETFs, but this has been designed with HGSI in mind. US market summary. Okay, thank you. Right, US market summary. Let's go down to, already have this in my favorites. US market summary. Let me just quickly run that. And here you'll see, ooh, oh, look at this. There is a message. Process cannot access this XML file because it's being used by another process. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Let's let's see, is it being used by another process? That's a very interesting message. Okay, I'm going to ignore that for now. And what I'm going to do is move on to %B migration. We'll come back to that one. %B bucket migration. I mentioned earlier that we always had a %B template in EdgeRater. And I worked on this with Ian Woodward, and we had great fun working on this template. And he seemed to really like it. And I added a lot of things in based on his wishes. And it's one of my favorite templates too, %B buckets report. But this is an old version. So now there's a new version, and you'll find it in the Pro Tools category. This is one that you don't need HGSI to run, but we like to run it as HGSI users on the S&P 1500 index, which is an index that comes from, it is also an index that is in EdgeRater, and it's also in HGSI. Okay, so in Pro Tools, you'll find %B migration. This is the next step, the next version of that template. S&P 1500.txt is one of those. So it's got data up to 417. We'll run this template and take a look at the results. So it's doing a bunch of processing. Generally, whenever you run a template in EdgeRater, it does a bunch of processing behind the scenes. Sometimes it's very quick, and other times it can be quite involved. But the resulting information is very useful. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this all securities report. For charts, I'm just going to, it doesn't really matter. I'm not looking at a chart here, but I do want to have my candlesticks back. And what this is showing is stocks that are above, below. It tells you where they are in relation to the Bollinger Bands. Are they above the mid band? Are they above the upper band? Are they below the lower band, or somewhere in between? This gives you a profile of all of the stocks in whatever list you ran it against, in this case, the S&P 1500. So yeah, Paul, you've got that message a few times. Okay, I'm going to have to look at that. That's the first time I've seen it. I will try and find out what that's all about. So yeah, so the S&P 1500. So you run this, and the extra information this gives you over and above the old template is it tells you where the bucket information has been previously, and where stocks are flowing. What I mean is, a single stock can exist somewhere in relation to its Bollinger Bands. Above upper, okay, in the upper half, at the middle, the lower half, or below the lower. This is a profile of that. But generally it gives you kind of a market breadth profile of all of those stocks. But each day, this will change. You know, as I go back through the days here, I'm going to look at different profiles. So you might go from one day here to the next day and say, well, that's, you know, somewhat interesting that the number of stocks in bucket 8 increased from 200 on this day to 250 on this day. But where did they come from? Did they come from buckets below the current bucket or buckets above the current bucket? You know, are they stocks that are falling down from above or rising up from below? And this migration report tells you which direction things are moving. The first thing is you get like a shadow histogram in the main area, and that's just telling you what that bar was yesterday. And then, but the other interesting thing is the migration report below there, where it says outflows from prior bucket, inflows to current bucket. And this actually shows you, which bucket is moving from where to where. As we scroll through the history, and I always like to do this with SPY over here. Let me just put that on. So I'm putting on SPY on my main chart because it's a major market index, gives me some context of what's going on in the market. And I always like to have my annotations turned on. And so what you'll see now is as I go through, the chart is now updating and telling me what day I'm looking at. But I can see all of the migrations that are happening from one bucket to the next. If it's green in this area below, it's a positive thing. It means stocks are flowing from lower buckets into higher buckets. If it's red, it means it's a negative thing. Stocks are flowing from higher buckets into lower buckets. So this is kind of your instantaneous readout, if you like, and this is telling you the delta, where things are coming from, and it's very interesting to go back through history and see where the buckets were. Now, let's take a look. The other thing, once you have a chart up, is you can actually click on the chart, and the histogram will change to the date that you clicked on. So let's click on the very low point down here, which is March 23rd. Okay, and the viewing did not change. So let me just click on that, March 23rd. So March 23rd was, you might say that was a capitulation low, potentially. I know a lot of people are saying that the market is going to come back down and retest those lows and maybe go lower. Who actually knows? I don't know. It's possible. Anything's possible. But what this is showing you is that on that day, there was an extreme, this is very extreme, 97% of stocks were below the mid band of the Bollinger Bands. There weren't that many below the lower Bollinger Band. And if we change this to percentage view, we'll see that that was actually only 12% below the lower Bollinger Band. That's not, I've seen it worse than that. That's not actually too bad. Well, it's pretty bad, but it's not, I've seen it a lot worse. Okay, where you've got essentially this histogram below the lower band being essentially taking up all of the data is in there, and these are all really low. So yeah, that's not terrible. Having said that, there was a long period where this did come down. It did give some stocks. It wasn't that long. It's only 34 days, but it did give it didn't happen all in one day. So yeah, so stocks were moving around. Anyway, what you can do is once you've selected the date of interest, you can then scroll forward day by day. You can see how they're moving. I'll turn our annotation back on and we'll see what we're looking at on the chart. I'll scroll the chart forward a bit so you can see. And this is basically from the low then, we're looking at how the stocks moved within their Bollinger Bands, how they're sloshing backwards and forwards. And you can get a feel for whether this is a normal market, whether it's overdone. There's definitely a sloshing feel to it, where stocks are all sloshing one way and then coming back the other way. But it's really not normal. Now we've gotten to a level here. This was on Wednesday. We got to a level where you had 91% of stocks were above the above the mid band. The profile, however, is not too bad. I've seen it worse, or you might say better, but I don't think that's better when you've got everything above the upper Bollinger Band. That generally leads to things falling back down again. But but it's a positive sign when most things are above the mid Bollinger Band. But interesting to look at the profile where things sit. Okay, this was only a few days ago, so we've been really in the upper areas, and then Friday we ended up at a 91.9%. So it's that is a positive sign. I mean, the Fed is obviously fueling the market, providing a lot of liquidity. But interesting times. I would say just be careful here, because the index broke above the 50-day moving average. There's some really key levels coming up right here. You've got the 200-day moving average, and this is also occurs just after the fib retracement of like 61.3%. So very, very dodgy position here to be putting on new longs. You'd really need to see it break above the 200-day moving average to get excited about it again. You've really not got that much room in here to before you know there's probably going to be some reaction there. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but that's my thought anyway. What does everyone else think? Do you think the market is going to retest the lows, or are we going to close above the 200-day moving average and get to higher highs? What do you think? Okay, Ralph. Okay, Ralph. How did you type a specific symbol? Okay, on a chart, if you click on the chart, press your space bar, you'll get a choose symbol dialog will come up, allow you to, I typed SPY in there, SPY. All caps, use all capitals when you're doing that, and then it will bring up that symbol from your database. Okay, Ralph, 29, 3,000, yeah, on the E-mini S&Ps, right, or on the SPX, yeah. I believe that we're on the same page there. I think we are on the same page. Although the new lows thing, that is a real interesting question. We don't know. It's going to be, yeah, it's just going to be interesting to watch over the next month or two, I think. I don't know if you saw my report on last weekend, but I've been looking at options and doing some research into option behavior. If you had a chance to look at my blog post, great. And if not, did you know, I'll just give you a little taste of this, edgerater.com. So if you go to EdgeRater website, and let's just bring it up over here. Sorry, this is a little, there's a quick diversion. EdgeRater website, go to the blog. Okay, look at the latest post, options performance over 3 periods of the coronavirus crash. And this was done last weekend. So at that point, we only had a 25% gain from the lows. Right now, we're at about 30%. Anyway, the options in the SPY, if you had held the option with a 0.1 delta from the high over here for 33 days, you would have actually experienced a 6,500% gain in that put option. So quite amazing numbers there. And then if you'd have held the rally from the low, obviously you can never predict these things, but if you had with the 0.1 delta option, you would have experienced a 1,500% gain from the low. And Hindenburg-Omen report, very quickly, today you will find in your EdgeRater there is a new symbol list called Hindenburg. This is because the list of stocks that you should use for detecting Hindenburg omens, everyone uses a different list and get different signals. So I just wanted to kind of put together a somewhat definitive list so we can all get the same signals. And so you'll find Hindenburg is a new list in EdgeRater. And in that list, I've also added SPY, and this will really help because one of the requirements for detecting Hindenburg omens is a movement in an index, and we need to use a major market index. I'm choosing SPY here. All right, so Hindenburg omen, you probably have heard of Hindenburg omen, and I will just briefly say there's a whole bunch of information in here you can look up, and I even did a video with Ian Woodward on the Hindenburg omen, which has a link in here too. But the claim to fame of the Hindenburg omen is there's never been a market crash without a Hindenburg omen. And let me just run the Hindenburg omen right now. This report on hindenburg.txt. You'll find, Paul, you'll find this in your symbol lists drop down. Click on your drop down, and it should just be called Hindenburg. But it won't be there unless you've done an update in the last, say, 2 or 3 hours, because I literally added this very recently today. You will definitely get it when the next data update is available. If you want to get it before the next data update is available, you have to do a little I'll show you what you need to do. You come over here, you come to home, you come to data providers, you go to EdgeRater, and you say download and install symbol lists. There's a button right there. You would be able to get it from there. Okay, so Hindenburg omen, here we are. A whole bunch of calculations that are done. This is just listing all of the different fields that are used in the calculation, but the main one to pay attention to is Hindenburg omen, yes or no. If there is one, it's called Hindi. It has to have 4 conditions that are true to fire a Hindi. If there's 3 conditions that are true out of 4, you get a kind of a red highlight, but 4 out of 4 is your real Hindenburg. So let's see, when was the last Hindenburg omen? And what you need to do in EdgeRater is click on a column that has a symbol in it, like this one here, SPY. All right, so the very last Hindenburg omen we got was there. If you'd have seen that on the day, what would you have thought, though? You know, it just looked like a very steep decline on one day with high volume. Okay, generated a Hindenburg omen, the very last one that we've seen. So this is the action that's happened since then. Okay, so that was an omen that it did precede a market crash, and that's the claim to fame: is you never get a market crash without one of these. We had oh, I should click over here. We had several back here. All right, which occurred in groups. There was a group of 3 occurred. Didn't lead immediately to the crash, but you tend to get clusters of these things before you see a market crash. So as Ian said, you need to sit up and pay attention when you ever see a Hindenburg omen, and they don't occur that frequently. The last time we saw one before then, all right, there was an isolated one back here. Let's look at where that was. It was very isolated, not surrounded by others. That's okay. When was the last time after that? Before that it was over here. Okay, where was that in the market phase? Okay, market was in a little turmoil here. Did fire a few Hindis, quite a few of them, in fact, and that would have gotten people worried. So as I say, the claim to fame is you haven't seen a market crash without them, but you could see them without having the market crash. That's the problem, really. But pay attention when they are occurring. You want to have a clear period in order for nice plain sailing. But one interesting thing you'll see, if we go back a little bit further, is take a look over here. I'm going to take a look at this day, late 2018. So let's go back. No Hindenburgs here. Let's see. We started to see some in August of 2018. And let's see where they are. Okay, so we started to see them here. The market still had a little bit to gain after they started appearing. Okay, still increased, and then we started seeing them again. So it obviously gets people worried when these occur. At some point they appear and you're like, well, they've appeared a lot and the market's always gone up, so I just ignore it. But it's probably not a good idea to completely ignore these things, because they are indicating something. that is not quite okay. So the very last one we saw before the market crash of last December, December 2018, was right here. So, even though they don't all lead to immediate declines, they are warnings, and you can get massive moves like this. And that was the very last one you saw before you had this 20% decline down here. So very interesting to watch. Hindenburg. Okay. Let's see, what else? Okay, Paul, hopefully you found that, Paul. Okay, good. I think I've got most of the questions. If there's any other questions on the integration with EdgeRater and HGSI, send me an email at chrisw@edgerater.com, and I'll try, if I get a lot of questions around the same topic, then I'll put together a video response and send that out to people, just so that everybody has the same information. Now, you can try, if you have EdgeRater and you don't have HGSI, you can get a free trial of HGSI. If you have HGSI and you don't have EdgeRater, you can get a 14-day free trial of EdgeRater. You just go to the location that I showed you. Go to EdgeRater Home, and you just say, try it now. You will come up with, you'll enter your email information, first name, last name, phone number, say that you're not a robot, and you'll get a username and password that you can use for free for 14 days, give you full access to the program. And if you have HGSI, you can do the hookup steps that we talked about, and you'll be able to do everything that we just did. And if you have HGSI and EdgeRater, join the Facebook group as well, right, Paul? You've got the EdgeRater and look on Facebook for a group called EdgeRater, or what's it called? HGSI and EdgeRater user group. So it's for people who use one or the other or both of the programs together. And Paul is quite active on there, and always posting good information of what's going on in the market. Lots of market summary reports you'll see on there, and percent B bucket reports, and other things from HGSI. Paul is super active and very, very helpful on the HGSI and EdgeRater board. Okay, Wojtek. Once you ran the template, can you see which database did you run it on? You could change that between different templates. Okay, so Wojtek is asking, when you're looking at a report, can you tell where the data came from? Or essentially, I would imagine you're talking about which symbol list it was run on. And the answer is, at the moment, there's nothing indicated in the report about where the template came from. So, for example, I'm going to choose a very small list here. Let's take, I say it's not very small, but the CBOE weeklies list, one of my favorite lists. And say we were running seasonality. Okay, seasonality now. So what you've got is a report which is called on your hard drive Seasonality Now, and it's giving you the date and time that the report was run, but it's not telling you where the list came from. So so by default, it's not saving that information for you. You do always have the option of hitting save as. It's not ideal for what you're asking, but if you really wanted to know the list this came from, you could say I'm going to call this seasonality, and it's come from the CBOE weeklies, something like that, and then hit save, and then that's permanent record on your hard drive, and you've made a manual intervention to name that file. So unfortunately that's the way it is right now. I could look at adding it to the file name, but the file names are already quite long with the date, the name of the template, the date, and the time. But I see the I see the need for it. I do. Okay, I think that's it. Great. Well, thank you everybody for attending. It went a little bit over, but hopefully you got something from it. And it was really good to get online and talk about EdgeRater again. And have a great rest of your weekend and talk soon. Bye for now.